Passignano 2014, siamo qui con David Harvey. Ieri si è parlato molto di dinamiche estrattive, si è parlato anche del tema dell'accumulazione, cercando di declinarla poi anche all'interno del contesto del capitalismo contemporaneo. Quindi adesso proveremo a chiedere a David qual è la novità che rappresenta l'accumulazione per spoliazione rispetto ad altre forme di accumulazione che si sono date nella storia del capitalismo. Hi David.
Hi.
It's a pleasure for us to hear you here in Passignano. We yesterday spoke a lot about extraction, and it was very interesting to see how this notion has been used in order to understand new dynamics of the contemporary capitalism. So we would like to ask you, which is the difference between what you called the accumulation for dispossession in contrast of other forms of accumulation that we had in the history of capitalism?
Well, extractivism, or the discussion of that, has largely come out of Latin America over the last 15, 20 years, and it's mainly about extracting of resources so that indigenous populations will say, why should our resources in oil be extracted for the benefit of populations in the United States for a very low amount of money, which we didn't particularly want anyway. So extractivism is a particular kind of dispossession of population, which has a lot to do with the taking away of resources from one part of the world for the benefit of another. Accumulation by dispossession, however, would include that kind of seizing of people's assets, mineral, environmental, and the like, but it would also include taking away people's rights. For instance, people's rights of access to public spaces in cities. The transformation of public spaces into semi-private spaces in shopping malls and things of that sort. So we would talk about the dispossession of people's capacity to utilize the environment in a particular way. And then there's an active form of dispossession which amounts to robbery and thievery, which we see in the way in which millions of people were dispossessed of their homes in the United States through a credit engineered scam. The credit system is a very good way of extracting wealth from one group in the population to give to another group in the population. So that Wall Street has assembled a vast amounts of wealth by dispossessing large segments of the population of their own asset values. So these dynamics of dispossession would include events like that. Then, for example, the demolition of people's pension rights, so that trade unions are forced to forego their pension rights in a new settlement. In the city of Detroit, for example, the municipal government says we can't pay the pensions because we're bankrupt, and the judge says that's okay, you're not liable for the pensions. And so people are saying, I expect my pension and I'm 65 years old, where is it? And the answer is, it's not there. This is a form of dispossession. So what we've seen is a lot of forms of dispossession, and I think that this is a political theme that it's very useful to concentrate on, as kind of say, what are the politics of dispossession going on in our society right now? Where can we see examples of this, and can we have a united front against it, which will then unite, people who are trying to protect their access to minerals with people who are losing their houses in New York City. So there's a broad basis, if you like, for coalition politics via thinking about how capitalism works through dispossession.
Okay, right. And ieri un altro dei temi che poi ha attraversato il dibattito è quello della metropoli, della città non solo come luogo di vita ma anche come luogo di produzione, anzi dove vita e produzione si intrecciano. Quindi quello che vorremmo chiedere a David è come poi la metropoli è attraversata da queste dinamiche di estrattivismo. David, yesterday another issue very important that during the debate a lot you and Tony talked about was the question of metropolis.
Yes.
Not only like a place for living, but also as a place of production.
Yes.
Like a firm. We could say that in the metropolis, life and work are strictly linked, are
Yes.
maybe one only thing. We cannot divide in the contemporary capitalism these two different moments. So I would like to ask you, which is the role of the extractivism in the metropolis, considering that metropolis is not only a place of living but also a place of production?
Well, if you think of the metropolis as a place where a great deal of value is being created, it's also a place where a great deal of value is being appropriated, taken away. And sometimes you would say that's maybe a bit legitimate in the sense that people should pay for certain facilities that are provided, you know, the streets and the sewers and the water supply and all of that. But on the other hand, what we also see is a great deal of illegal appropriation and legal appropriation, which is actually taking away from people through things like increasing rents on housing, the destruction of affordable housing, and turning the housing in the city into condominiums for the rich. The result is, ordinary population has almost no place to live, and this is again a form of extraction of wealth and well-being by allowing certain market processes to work through the land and through property in the way they do, so that property prices go up higher and higher and higher, and you end up with a situation where in New York City half of the population is trying to live on less than $30,000 a year, which means that they shouldn't be spending more than something like $1,500 a month rent, but there's no place in New York you can get for less than $1,500. I mean, you would pay that amount for a parking space in New York City.
Okay. So, last question. Facciamo un'ultima domanda a David. Quindi sembra che in questo tentativo di comunque riconcettualizzare la nozione di estrattivismo ci sia anche poi la volontà di vedere sotto una chiave diversa la nozione di sfruttamento. Quindi quello che vorremmo chiedere a David è se poi alla luce di questa diversa concezione di sfruttamento, le lotte anche che si danno nella metropoli non sono semplicemente lotte per il salario nel conflitto capitale-lavoro, ma sono lotte per le forme di vita e per un diritto alla città. David, so we could say that in this attempt to consider on another side the category of extractivism, there is also the attempt to give a different meaning to the notion of exploitation. And maybe, if I'm correct, there is also the attempt to see the contemporary struggles not only like struggles between capital and labor, but a sort of struggles for the living forms and right to the city. Is it right?
I think that, for instance, this morning there was a very interesting discussion on social unionism. And one of the forms of struggle is over the social wage as opposed to the wage. And the wage bargain is, of course, about certain structures of exploitation which exist between capital and labour. The social wage, however, is about what you can buy with the wage that you get. And is there affordable housing? Is there affordable health care? Is there affordable access to education, good education? Is there affordable access to public spaces, things of that kind? So what you start to see is that the social wage is something that has to be provided by a different route than the negotiation that goes on between capital and labour over the actual wage rate. And therefore, what urban politics is about the construction of the social wage. And to the degree that political power gets hold of the municipality and government and all those kinds of things, it means that the social wage diminishes, even under circumstances where the individual wage may rise. So you may end up being far worse off because, yes, okay, you get a better wage, but on the other hand you have to pay much more for your housing. You suddenly find you have to pay for the education, you have to pay for the health care, you have to pay for the access to what were formerly public spaces. So the destruction of the social wage has been one of the big features of the neoliberal era. And neoliberal urban politics has been very much about the destruction of that social wage in urban settings. The result of that is what we see are a whole set of struggles emerging around social movements trying to recuperate what has been lost and the social wage. And this is, again, a form of dispossession which has occurred, which now has to be reversed, if you like, by social struggles to try to re-establish affordable housing in the city, access to good education for free, access to decent health care, access to that public spaces. There's a big struggle going on right now in many cities. And what we've seen actually in the last few years are major eruptions in urban areas, like in Brazil. I mean, what was the big eruption in Brazil a year or so ago about? It was about all this money being spent on the World Cup and not being spent on the social wage. What did we see in Gezi, in Turkey? What we saw was an eruption of people protesting against the loss of a social wage. So this is, again, one of the big areas of contestation right now. And it means that the politics of everyday life in the metropolis is the grounding for, it seems to me, an alternative political activism. And we're seeing that coming into being. And I think we have to theorize that and consolidate that as part of a political movement.
Okay, thank you, David.
You focused a lot in your research about culture, creativity, and the notion of collective symbolic capital. So I'm interested in knowing what is the peculiar role of these categories, like creativity and culture, in urban policy and urban policies in present time, and how they are linked to monopoly rent, for example, in today's cities.
Well, the category of monopoly rent has to do with the idea that you can extract extra value from the fact that something is unique or special and non-replicable. And one of the roles of culture, and particularly the commodification of history and so on, is to try to emphasize the uniqueness. That if you come to Rome, it's unique. If you come to Barcelona, it's unique. And so you emphasize that. In so doing, you open up the whole kind of field of cultural activity and cultural production as part of the commodification of the city, the branding of the city. And so the question then is, as soon as you start talking about the branding of the city, you say, well, what brand is it that we want to? And then there's a struggle over the branding of the city. And cultural producers become very much embroiled in that struggle. And there are many people now who are, I think, involved in this process from all the way from commercial activities of what's called imagineering the city. I mean, there are consultants now who consult in imagineering the city, which is crazy. But at the same time, there are people who want to produce a different kind of city. And so there is a struggle going on over how that is to be done. I think, however, we have to be careful and not make too much out of this idea that there is, quote, a creative class or something like that is somehow or other a privileged vanguard. I think there's a danger of that. We have to think about what it is that will bring all people together in the city. And I think the cultural producers have a very important role to play in animating some of that struggle. But when some people seem to think that they're the only class in town, the only class that matters, I think that is a very dangerous supposition.
Thank you.